Good day, learners. Today, I keep on saying learners, sorry, it's students. I trust that you're well and you should be busy now with assessment 4, which is covered in learning unit 4. So today we will look at the assessment of F.E.T economics in the diverse South African classroom. Now to start off, we know that no form of meaningful teaching and learning can take place with some form of assessment. You can't just keep on teaching and teaching and teaching without assessing the learners. You must know, or you must establish what they have learned from your teaching. And that establishment of what they've learned is called assessment. Assessment in its simplest form is also called testing or evaluation. Now, for the school curriculum in South Africa, for the F.E.T curriculum, we know that we find all information in our CAPS document. And so we find chapter 4 in your CAPS document is dealing with assessment. Now, firstly, you must know the terminology that we use when we are dealing with assessment. The first terminology that I'm going to refer to is called criterion reference assessment. Criterion reference assessment. That is, the progress of a learner is determined by how that learner performs in each type of assessment. Now, for economics, F.E.T economics, there are 7 assessments that are prescribed for the year. So the first one is assignment, and then it is a control test in term 1. In term 2, for example, it is a project, and then it is the mid-year exam. So every time a learner does an assessment, we must record how well the learner has done in that assessment. So by the end of the second term, we will have 4 assessments. And for each assessment, the learner will have a mark. And that is called criterion reference assessment, because the criteria are different for every assessment that you've done. The other type of assessment is norm reference assessment. Now, norm reference assessments is when you compare the scores of learners to that of other learners. Now, this is a controversial topic these days because in South Africa, we do not want to compare learners with one another. But it is there. And unfortunately, being human, we will always do that. We will look at who is our top learners, who is our weakest learners, etc. So that type of assessment whereby we compare the score of a learner to that of other learners is that we refer to as norm reference assessments. And you as a teacher or as a future teacher, you must know the difference between these two types of assessment. As an educator, you must assess teaching and learning situations regularly. Otherwise, learners will lose interest. You can't give learners an assessment, but then you don't mark the assessment. You must mark it as soon as possible so that they can have feedback as to how they are doing in regard to the subject. Then the types of assessment that we need to look at. We are going to look at 2 major types, namely called formative assessment, whereby the learner is formed through the assessment, and summative assessment. Summative comes from the word summary. You summarize everything that you've done for that specific assessment. Now, formative assessment is also called assessment for learning. Assessment for learning. I always remember it, the F. The F for, the first F, and then formative is also a F. So this assessment is on a continuous basis throughout the year. So we assess the learner throughout the year in the form of assignments, projects, presentations, control tests, etc. Those are formative assessments or continuous assessment, it's also called. Now, when I was at school, we didn't have all this different forms of assessment. We wrote tests during the year that didn't contribute anything to a year mark, nothing. All right, so we were reliant on summative assessment. But currently in the system, we have these two types of assessments. Formative, whereby learners are assessed throughout the year. After a patch of learning, they are being assessed. That is called formative assessment. The module that you are doing is also formative assessment because you are assessed on a continuous basis. You don't write an examination or a summative assessment at the end of the period. But in the school system, you have formative and summative assessment. Summative assessment is also called assessment of learning. What the learners have done, they are now being assessed. And these assessments occur at defined key points. Now, what are these defined key points? Such as the end of a semester. Semester is 6 months. Ne? Now, these are normally your mid-year or your June exams and your final examinations in November. That is your summative assessments. Right. Now we know that the formative assessment and the summative assessments are added together at the end of the year using specific formulas to determine whether you pass, whether the learner pass economics or not. So I hope you understand the difference between the two. Formative assessment is also called assessment for learning. It is done throughout the year. Summative assessment is done at the end of a key point. In simple terms, in June, the learners write an examination. That is called a summative assessment. They also write an examination at the end of the year. And that one is very, very important, especially in grade 12, because it contributes to 75% of the overall mark for a learner to pass. Then assessments are further classified into informal or daily assessments. These ones, there's no marks for it, and learners, just as you students, are not keen to complete it, right? And these are class activities, homework, etc. And then you have your formal assessments. Now, your formal assessments are those that must be done. They are prescribed by your employer. They are prescribed by CAPS. And these are your control tests, your examinations, your projects, your case studies, etc. And those are for marks. And if one of the marks are incomplete, then your final mark will also be incomplete. Now, learners in economics will progress or pass if they obtained 30% or level 2 and higher. So, at the end of the year, or even during a formal assessment, if you get less than 30%, then you are not progressing. If you get 30% or more, then we can say that you will progress. Now, the final mark at the year end, is made up of 25% formative assessment. That is also called the school-based assessment. That is what you do during the year, excluding the examination. All the formal assessments, excluding the examinations, is called school-based assessment. And that counts 25% towards your final mark. That is the so-called year mark. The so-called year mark counts 25% of your over. So whatever the learners have done throughout the year, it counts 25% towards their final mark. And 75% is made up of the summative assessment or the examinations at the end of the year. And as I said, especially at grade 12 level, that is very important, that examination, because it counts 75% towards the final mark. Now, these marks are normally pre-calculated by the Department of Education, and they send the mark sheets through to the schools. So you just fill in the marks and the calculations will be done by the system itself. It is very important that you understand the pass rate, 30% or level 2, and level 3 up to level 7. Level 7 is 80% to 100%. Now, what is the value of assessment for teachers, learners, parents, and the school? That is covered in paragraph 4.3 in your learning unit. For example, assessment is the following value for learners. The learners can ascertain whether or not their knowledge is on par with the expected objectives, depending on the mark that they get. They can compare their level of achievement with that of the rest of the class. That is mostly your norm reference assessments, but remember, as I said, this is highly controversial. Assessment has got implications for the future. You can decide whether you want to continue with the subject, or whether you want to do the subject beyond school, whether you want to find a job with that specific subject. And it helps learners to plan their future. Also, assessments motivates learners to do their best. That is why it's important for us as teachers to mark these assessments as soon as we can. Now, when we set assessments, how do we go about it? We can't set assessments at one level only. There's different levels of setting an assessment. We can't have our whole question paper describe, list the advantages and the disadvantages, define the following term. Those are all at one level. And an assessment must be set according to what we call Bloom's taxonomy. Now, there are 3 combined or 6 individual levels for Bloom's taxonomy. Now, those levels are called the cognitive levels. And when you set an assessment, there are certain action words that you must use when setting these assessments. Now you can see on the slide, the levels are, first level is knowledge, the second level is understanding. Those are lower order cognitive levels. And the keywords that you use there for knowledge is define, identify, list, label. The second level is called understanding, or level 2. Here it is about explaining is your It's your verb that you use when you set a question, describe, interpret, summarize. You can see it's at a higher level than the knowledge level. But level 1 and 2, these level 1 and 2, which we call the lower cognitive levels, it must make up 30% of a economics question paper. Then the third level is a bit higher. Level 3, it's about application. Solve, apply, illustrate, use is your verbs. And this is where you give the learners, for example, a case study. And from the case study, you ask questions starting with those verbs or containing those verbs within them. Level 4 is the analytical level. Analyze, compare, classify, contrast. And those two levels, apply and analyze, is called your middle order cognitive levels. And the majority of your question paper must be made up of those questions. Level 3 and 4, 40%. So you can see level 1 and 2 gives you 30%, level 3 and 4 gives you 40%. If we add the two together, it gives you 70%. So there is still 30% missing. So where's the other 30% coming from? And that is coming from your higher order cognitive level questions. And that is evaluate, it's level 5, and create. Evaluate, and here you must use the verbs criticize, evaluate, order the information, appraise the article that you might have given them to read in the question paper. Then level 6 is design, create, compose, or plan. That is your higher order questions. So remember, when you set a question paper, it must be at different levels. It can't, all the questions can't just be at a lower order level. You can't make the question paper too easy, and it won't be accepted by your HOD at school, neither by your subject advisor outside of school, or whoever must moderate your question paper. So when you go out to school, you must be aware of these things, how to set a question paper. 30% lower level, 40% middle level, and 30% higher order questions. So Bloom's taxonomy is very important for setting assessments, because remember, question paper must cater for a range of cognitive levels and abilities. You don't only have strong learners in the class. That is why you can't just set level 3, 4, 5, and 6 questions, but you must also set level 1 and 2 questions. Not all questions in a test or an exam can be at one level only. Very, very important. Right. Now, the next slide talks to the structure of an examinations paper. Now, an economics paper consists of two papers, paper 1 and paper 2. Now, paper 1 is normally made up of the topics on which we set the paper 1 paper is coming from macroeconomics and economic pursuits. That is prescribed, and we cannot do otherwise. We cannot put microeconomics topics in a paper 1. Paper 1 is macroeconomics and economics pursuits. And that, if we look at the second bullet under paper 1, that is 2 hours. 2 hours. And you will see at the bottom, it is 2 hours for 150 marks. Paper 2, as I said, for economics, economics paper from grade 10 to grade 12, the outlay is the same, the topics is the same. Paper 1 consists of macroeconomics and economic pursuits, and paper 2 consists of microeconomics and contemporary economic issues. The sections for both papers are the same. Let us just look at the information that is typed in black, because that is the most important. That what is typed in blue is just for the June examinations at grade 10 level. But overall, from grade 10, November, grade 11, throughout grade 12, throughout the economics paper, the section A will consist of 30 marks. That is paper 1 and paper 2. Section B, you must choose. The learners must choose. They must do 2 from 3 questions. And you can see there it is 80 marks because it is 2 questions. 80 divided by 2 gives you 40 marks per question. So the learners are being given 3 questions, of which they must do 2 for both paper 1 and paper 2. And then section C is your so-called essay questions. And there are 2 essay questions, of which the learners must do 1 for 40 marks. And if we add it together, you can see that the 30 marks from section A plus the 80 marks from section B plus the 40 marks from section C gives us 150 marks. It is for both paper 1 and paper 2. As I said, the only different time given and marks allocated is for economics in grade 10. When in the June exam, section A, and now you can look at the blue section A, and we will look now at what section A consists of. It is for 20 marks. Section B is for 40 marks, and section C is also 40 marks. Right? 20 and 40, 60 plus 40 gives you 100 marks. And you can see by section B, and it's the same. The structure is the same for paper 1 and paper 2. In June, they must choose in section B 1 from 2 questions for 40 marks, and section C 1 for 40 marks. And that gives us a total of 100 marks. And what is important, the reason why I put in the June question allocation for paper 1 is because the control tests from grade 10 to 11, I mean grade 10, 11, and 12 is always for 100 marks. And when you set a control test, the section A will be 20 marks, section B will be 40 marks, and section C will be 40 marks, and that will give you 100 marks. And that is why I've got that asterisk there that says control tests for all grades are the same.